Justinian II, later known as Rhinotmetus, the slit-nosed or cut-nose, was born in 668 in Constantinople, the son of Emperor Constantine IV Pogonatus. His birth was a beacon of hope for a Byzantine Empire plagued by external invasions and internal conspiracies. Raised in the traditions of the imperial family, Justinian was groomed as an heir from an early age, instilled with knowledge of theology, statecraft, and a profound sense of his own divine destiny. The imperial court, steeped in ceremony and grandeur, shaped him into a figure who believed his rule was not just a right but a sacred mandate. At the tender age of 13 in 681, Justinian was crowned co-emperor alongside his father. This act was meant to secure the Heraclian dynasty's grip on power, but it also sowed the seeds of Justinian's unyielding self-confidence. He grew up believing that his authority was absolute, irrespective of the loyalty of the army or the will of the people. When Constantine IV died in 685, Justinian ascended to the throne as sole emperor at just 17. An ambitious young man, yet unprepared for the complexities of ruling an empire held together by fragile alliances and constant threats. Justinian's early years as emperor showed promise. He pursued an active foreign policy, negotiating treaties with the Arab Caliphate to stabilize the empire's eastern borders. His administrative and financial reforms aimed to strengthen the imperial treasury and centralize power. He sought to restore the glory of Byzantium, which had been battered by decades of wars and internal strife. Yet, beneath these achievements lay a fatal flaw: Justinian's own character. His blend of cruelty, religious fanaticism, and uncompromising vision of imperial authority alienated key factions within the empire. His tax reforms, designed to fund military campaigns, proved particularly disastrous. To finance his ambitions, Justinian imposed heavy taxes, especially on the Balkan provinces, sparking widespread resentment among the rural communities and provincial elites. He viewed these groups with suspicion, believing them potential traitors, and undermined their influence by appointing loyalists who answered only to him. This approach eroded the delicate balance of power that sustained the empire, fostering discontent that would later prove fatal. In 692, Justinian convened the Quinisex Council, also known as the Council in Trullo, part of the broader 5th-6th Ecumenical Council. His goal was to impose strict ecclesiastical discipline, but his decrees, particularly those condemning certain Latin customs, provoked outrage in Rome. Pope Sergius I rejected Justinian's policies, deepening the rift between Constantinople and the Western Church. This religious overreach further isolated Byzantium, alienating potential allies at a time when unity was desperately needed. The decisive blow came not from external enemies or the Church, but from within the empire's own ranks. By 695, Justinian's relentless purges of dissenters, combined with military setbacks, had eroded his support. The navy, a critical pillar of Byzantine power, rebelled under the leadership of Leontius, a seasoned general who had himself suffered under Justinian's repressive policies. The rebels seized Constantinople, and Justinian was captured. In a brutal and symbolic act, the rebels stripped Justinian naked before the jeering crowds and slit his nose, a punishment steeped in Byzantine tradition. Mutilation was not merely physical. It was a legal and cultural disqualification from the throne. A disfigured emperor was deemed unfit to rule, as physical imperfection was seen as a sign of divine disfavor. The mutilation was meant to render Justinian politically dead, a broken relic of a failed reign. Exiled to Cherson, a remote outpost in Crimea on the edge of the known world, Justinian was expected to fade into obscurity. Cherson was a harsh, windswept frontier, far from the marble halls of Constantinople. For most, it would have been a place of despair. For Justinian, it became a crucible. In Cherson, Justinian lived among soldiers, bureaucrats, colonists, and merchants who saw him as a shadow of his former self. Yet those who observed him closely noted something extraordinary. There was no despair in his eyes. Instead, there was focus, a silent, unyielding will. He endured the pain of his mutilation and the humiliation of exile without complaint. He watched, listened, and planned. Justinian's political instincts, far from dulled, were sharpened by adversity. Through a network of loyalists and secret agents still faithful from his days in Constantinople, he kept abreast of events in the empire. He learned that Leontius, the usurper who had overthrown him, was failing to stabilize the realm. The army was restless, and external enemies were growing bolder. Justinian saw opportunity where others saw only ruin. In a daring move, Justinian escaped Cherson. He did not flee into oblivion but toward power. Crossing the perilous Black Sea, he reached the lands of the Khazars, a nomadic people who controlled the steppes north of the Caucasus. The Khazar Khagan received Justinian with curiosity, recognizing the potential of an alliance with a former Byzantine emperor. To cement this partnership, Justinian married the Khagan's sister, a strategic union that secured him military and diplomatic support. This was no marriage of love but a calculated pact between two ambitious players. However, Constantinople soon learned of Justinian's survival. Leontius demanded the Khazars' hand over the exiled emperor. Intrigue followed, and an assassination attempt, poison in the night, nearly ended Justinian's life. He survived, and with his resolve hardened, he fled once more. Justinian's next move was to the Bulgars, a rising power in the Balkans led by the young and ambitious Khan Tervel. Tervel saw in Justinian a chance to expand his influence over Byzantium. In exchange for military support, Justinian offered Tervel a staggering reward: the title of Caesar, second only to the emperor in the Byzantine hierarchy, land, and gold. It was a bold promise, one that elevated a barbarian ruler to a status unprecedented in Byzantine history. In 705, Justinian, presumed dead by his enemies, appeared before the walls of Constantinople, not as a broken exile, but as a would-be emperor backed by Bulgar warriors. His force was small but determined. For 3 days, he camped outside the city, waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity came from within. Allies in Constantinople opened a secret passage, allowing Justinian to slip into the city. In a lightning coup, he seized the throne, deposing the usurper Tiberius III, who had succeeded Leontius. When Justinian II returned to Constantinople in 705, the city barely recognized him. The young emperor who had been humiliated a decade earlier was gone. In his place stood a figure almost otherworldly, his mutilated face now adorned with a golden prosthetic nose. This was no mere medical device, it was a political statement. The mutilation meant to erase his legitimacy was transformed into a symbol of his survival and defiance. Gold, the metal of divinity and eternity in Byzantine culture, became his answer to those who thought him broken. If blood could not protect him, fear would. Justinian's return was not a triumph of reconciliation but the beginning of a reign of vengeance. He launched a ruthless purge of those who had betrayed him in 695. Leontius and Tiberius III were dragged to the Hippodrome, the same arena where Justinian had been humiliated, and executed without mercy. Leontius had his hands severed. Tiberius was strangled. According to some accounts, Justinian watched the executions with cold detachment, the glint of his golden nose reflecting the terror of his enemies. The purges extended beyond the usurpers. Nobles, bishops, and officials who had failed to support him, or who had simply remained silent, faced imprisonment, exile, or death. The empire held its breath as Justinian's vengeance became state policy. His rule was no longer about reform or progress. It was about retribution. The golden nose, emblazoned on coins and frescoes, became a ubiquitous symbol of his survival, and a warning to those who might defy him. Justinian's second reign, 705 to 711, was a stark departure from his first. The emperor who had once sought to restore Byzantine glory now ruled as if every day was a reckoning for past betrayals. His obsession with control and distrust of those around him defined his governance. The court lived in fear, with ministers and generals speaking in whispers, every word weighed carefully to avoid the emperor's wrath. Justinian no longer sought counsel. He issued commands and demanded absolute obedience. The church, once a pillar of Byzantine society, became another target. Justinian saw himself as both secular and spiritual leader, intervening in ecclesiastical matters and deposing bishops who dared to disagree. His ongoing conflict with Rome, rooted in the Quinisex Council, deepened as the papacy rejected his religious policies outright. This further isolated Byzantium from the West, weakening its diplomatic position at a critical time. In the provinces, discontent simmered. Justinian's heavy-handed policies, high taxes, forced relocations, and the suppression of local elites fueled resentment. The army, once loyal, grew disillusioned. Even his closest allies began to see not a leader but a specter of fear. The golden nose, meant to inspire awe, became a symbol of something darker. A ruler consumed by his own trauma. By 710, the cracks in Justinian's empire were undeniable. His alliance with the Bulgars, which had secured his return, frayed as Conterval distanced himself. Rebellions erupted in the provinces, with Cherson, the city of his exile, emerging as a focal point of resistance. In a desperate bid to reassert control, Justinian dispatched a punitive expedition to Cherson. But betrayal struck again. The fleet, led by one of his trusted admirals, defected to the rebels. The army, weary of Justinian's relentless purges and erratic rule, saw no future in his leadership. In 711, Justinian's reign collapsed. A new rebellion, led by Philippicus Bardanes, a former prisoner of Justinian's, seized power. Justinian attempted to flee eastward with his young son, the last hope of the Heraclian dynasty. But there were no allies left to shelter him. Betrayed by those he had once trusted, Justinian was captured. His execution was swift and unceremonious, carried out on a roadside far from the grandeur of Constantinople. His son was killed alongside him, extinguishing the Heraclian line. The empire did not mourn. The palaces fell silent. The church offered no protest, and the provinces remained still. Justinian's death marked the end of a dynasty that had ruled Byzantium for over a century. But it was not the end of his legacy. Justinian II, famously known to history as Rhinotmetus, the Slit-Nosed, stands as one of the most enigmatic, dramatic, and polarizing figures in the rich and storied annals of the Byzantine Empire. His life, a roller coaster of unprecedented triumphs and devastating lows, weaves a compelling tale of resilience, unrelenting vengeance, and the inherently perilous nature of wielding absolute power. As the first Byzantine emperor to suffer the ignominy of deposition, endure brutal mutilation, and yet astonishingly reclaim his throne, Justinian's journey is a singularly remarkable episode in the empire's sprawling, millennium-long history. His iconic golden nose, a prosthetic meticulously crafted to conceal the grotesque disfigurement inflicted upon him, emerged as a powerful and enduring symbol, not only of his unyielding defiance against those who sought to obliterate his legacy, but also of the profound and destructive consequences of his obsessive, almost maniacal quest for control and domination. This narrative delves deeply into the complexities of Justinian's two reigns, his multifaceted and often contradictory character, and the lasting, controversial legacy he left behind in an era defined by relentless turbulence and upheaval. Born in the year 668 in the imperial capital of Constantinople, Justinian II was the son of Emperor Constantine IV Pogonatus, a direct heir to the storied Heraclian dynasty that had held the Byzantine throne since its founding in 610. His birth coincided with a period of existential crisis for the empire, which was battered by relentless external threats. Most notably the rapidly expanding Arab Caliphate, which had wrested control of Byzantium's eastern provinces, including Syria, Egypt, and Palestine, and plagued by internal divisions, including fierce theological disputes over monothelitism and persistent political intrigue that threatened to unravel the fabric of imperial governance. Raised within the opulent yet precarious confines of the imperial court, Justinian was meticulously groomed to embody the ideal of a divinely ordained ruler, steeped in the sacred traditions of Byzantine autocracy, where the emperor was seen as God's vicegerent on earth. His education was rigorous and comprehensive, emphasizing not only the intricacies of theology, which underpinned the empire's identity as the bastion of Orthodox Christianity, but also the practical arts of statecraft, military strategy, and diplomacy, all designed to reinforce his belief that his lineage bore a sacred and inviolable mandate to preserve the empire as the earthly manifestation of God's divine kingdom. This upbringing instilled in Justinian a sense of destiny, but also a dangerous inflexibility that would shape both his rule and his eventual downfall. At the age of 13, in 681, Justinian was crowned co-emperor, a strategic move to secure the dynasty's continuity. This early elevation to power, however, fostered a sense of entitlement that would shape his reign. When Constantine IV died in 685, Justinian, at just 17, became sole emperor. His youth and ambition were both assets and liabilities. He possessed the energy to pursue bold initiatives, but lacked the experience to navigate the empire's complex web of alliances and rivalries. The Byzantine throne was not merely a seat of power. It was an arena where emperors were tested by the loyalty of the army, the church, and the aristocracy. Justinian, driven by a vision of absolute authority, would soon discover its fragility. Justinian's early years as emperor showed promise. He pursued an active foreign policy, negotiating treaties with the Arabs to stabilize the empire's eastern frontiers, which had been battered by decades of war. His administrative reforms aimed to strengthen the theme system, a military administrative structure that assigned land to soldiers in exchange for service, bolstering the empire's defenses. Financial reforms sought to replenish the treasury, depleted by constant warfare. Yet these efforts were overshadowed by Justinian's autocratic tendencies. His tax policies, designed to fund military campaigns, placed heavy burdens on the provinces, particularly in the Balkans, sparking resentment among rural communities and local elites. Justinian's character was a volatile mix of ambition, cruelty, and religious zeal. He saw himself as God's chosen ruler, intolerant of dissent and determined to impose his will on both secular and ecclesiastical spheres. His religious policies, particularly his role in the Quinisex Council of 692, aimed to standardize church practices but alienated the Western Church. By condemning Latin customs such as clerical celibacy, Justinian provoked the ire of Pope Sergius I, deepening the rift between Constantinople and Rome. This religious overreach, combined with his purges of perceived enemies among the aristocracy and clergy, eroded his support base. By 695, the empire's discontent reached a breaking point. Military setbacks, coupled with Justinian's relentless repression, fueled a rebellion led by the general Leontius. The navy, a cornerstone of Byzantine power, turned against the emperor. Captured in Constantinople, Justinian was subjected to a brutal and symbolic punishment. His nose was slit, a mutilation intended to disqualify him from the throne. In Byzantine culture, physical imperfection was seen as a sign of divine disfavor, rendering a mutilated man unfit to rule. Exiled to Cherson, a remote outpost in Crimea, Justinian was expected to vanish from history. Cherson was a harsh, windswept frontier, far from the grandeur of Constantinople. For most, it would have been a place of despair. For Justinian, it was a forge for his ambitions. Stripped of his throne and disfigured, he refused to succumb to defeat. Living among soldiers, bureaucrats, and merchants, he observed and planned. His mutilation, meant to break him, instead sharpened his resolve. Through a network of loyalists, he monitored events in Constantinople, learning of Leontius's failures and the empire's growing instability. In a daring escape, Justinian fled Cherson, crossing the Black Sea to the lands of the Khazars, a nomadic people who controlled the steppes north of the Caucasus. The Khazar Khagan, intrigued by the potential of an alliance with a former emperor, welcomed him. Justinian married the Khagan's sister, securing military and diplomatic support through this strategic union. When Constantinople demanded his extradition, and an assassination attempt nearly succeeded, Justinian fled again, this time to the Bulgars. Khan Tervel, a young and ambitious ruler, saw in Justinian an opportunity to expand Bulgar influence. In exchange for troops, Justinian promised Tervel the title of Caesar, land, and gold, an unprecedented concession for a barbarian leader. In 705, Justinian returned to Constantinople, backed by Bulgar warriors. Slipping into the city through a secret passage, he seized the throne in a swift coup, deposing Tiberius III, who had succeeded Leontius. His return was a shock to the empire. The mutilated emperor, now adorned with a golden prosthetic nose, transformed his disfigurement into a symbol of defiance. Gold, the metal of divinity in Byzantine culture, proclaimed his resilience and legitimacy. The golden nose was not merely a physical replacement but a political statement. Justinian had overcome the ultimate humiliation and returned as God's chosen ruler. Yet his second reign, 705 to 711, was not a triumph but a descent into vengeance. Justinian launched a brutal purge of those who had betrayed him. Leontius and Tiberius III were executed in the Hippodrome, their deaths a public spectacle meant to reassert his authority. Nobles, clergy, and officials faced imprisonment, exile, or execution. The empire, already strained, lived in fear. Justinian's golden nose, emblazoned on coins and frescoes, became a ubiquitous symbol of his survival and a warning to his enemies. Justinian's second reign was defined by paranoia and control. He no longer sought to reform or unite the empire but to punish it. His court was a place of whispers, where fear replaced loyalty. His interventions in church affairs deepened the schism with Rome, and his heavy-handed policies alienated the provinces. The army, once a pillar of his power, grew disillusioned. The golden nose, meant to inspire awe, became a symbol of a ruler consumed by his own trauma. By 710, rebellions erupted across the empire. Cherson, the city of his exile, became a focal point of resistance. Justinian dispatched a punitive expedition, but the fleet defected, led by Philippicus Bardanes, a former prisoner of Justinian's. In 711, the rebellion reached Constantinople. Justinian, attempting to flee with his young son, was betrayed and captured. His execution was swift and unceremonious, ending the Heraclean dynasty. His son was killed alongside him, extinguishing the line. Justinian II's story is a paradox. A ruler who defied fate, returning from mutilation and exile to reclaim his throne, yet whose obsession with vengeance destroyed him. His reigns were marked by bold but flawed reforms, religious overreach, and a failure to balance autocracy with pragmatism. The empire he sought to dominate outlived him, but his story became a myth, recounted by chroniclers with awe and caution. The golden nose remains his enduring symbol. In Byzantine art and coinage, it proclaimed his survival. In history, it warned of the dangers of power built on fear. Justinian was not a great reformer or general, but his resilience made him a legend. He proved that the Byzantine throne was an arena of survival, where even a mutilated emperor could rise again, only to fall when vengeance overshadowed leadership. His legacy endures as a cautionary tale of ambition, trauma, and the fleeting nature of power. To fully appreciate Justinian II's story, it's essential to place it within the broader context of the Byzantine Empire in the late 7th and early 8th centuries. This was a period of profound crisis for Byzantium. The empire faced relentless pressure from the Arab Caliphate, which had conquered vast swathes of former Byzantine territory, including Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. Internally, the empire was plagued by theological disputes, economic strain, and a military stretched thin by constant warfare. Justinian inherited an empire still reeling from the losses of the 7th century. His father, Constantine IV, had managed to stabilize the eastern frontier through a combination of military victories and diplomacy, notably the defense of Constantinople against the Arab siege of 674 to 678. However, the empire's resources were depleted, and its administrative structures were under strain. Justinian's early reforms, such as his efforts to streamline tax collection and strengthen the theme system, a military administrative structure that assigned land to soldiers in exchange for service, were attempts to address these challenges. Yet his heavy-handed approach, particularly his reliance on loyalists over local elites, undermined the very stability he sought to achieve. The Quinisex Council of 692 was a pivotal moment in Justinian's reign. The council's canons aimed to standardize ecclesiastical practices across the empire, but they also reflected Justinian's desire to assert imperial authority over the church. By condemning practices like clerical celibacy, common in the Latin West, Justinian alienated Rome, further straining the already fragile relationship between Constantinople and the papacy. This religious schism had long-term consequences, contributing to the growing divide between Eastern and Western Christianity that would culminate in the Great Schism centuries later. Justinian's mutilation and exile in 695 were not isolated acts but part of a broader Byzantine tradition of using physical disfigurement to disqualify rivals. The practice was rooted in the belief that an emperor's physical perfection reflected divine favor. By sparing Justinian's life but mutilating him, his enemies sought to render him ineligible for the throne while avoiding the sin of regicide. His return, defying this tradition, was a profound challenge to Byzantine political norms. The alliances Justinian forged in exile with the Khazars and Bulgars highlight the complex geopolitics of the region. The Khazars, a semi-nomadic Turkic people, were a rising power in the Pontic-Caspian steppe, strategically positioned between Byzantium and the Arab Caliphate. Justinian's marriage to the Khagan's sister was a masterstroke of diplomacy, securing him a foothold in a region critical to Byzantine security. Similarly, his alliance with Khan Tervel of the Bulgars was a pragmatic move, leveraging Bulgar military strength to reclaim his throne. The title of Caesar granted to Tervel was a remarkable concession, underscoring Justinian's desperation and his willingness to break with tradition to achieve his goals. Justinian's second reign, however, reveals the limits of vengeance as a governing principle. His purges, while satisfying his personal need for retribution, destabilized the empire further. The execution of Leontius and Tiberius III in the Hippodrome was a public spectacle meant to reassert his authority, but it also alienated potential allies. His obsession with control left little room for compromise or coalition building, essential for governing a diverse and fractious empire. The rebellion in Kherson in 711 was the final nail in Justinian's coffin. Kherson, a remote but strategically important outpost, had long been a place of exile for disgraced elites. Its defiance of Justinian was symbolic. The very place where he had been sent to disappear now rejected his authority outright. The defection of his fleet, led by Philippicus Bardanes, underscores the erosion of loyalty within the military, a critical institution in Byzantine politics. Justinian's death marked the end of the Heraclian dynasty, which had ruled since 610. The dynasty's collapse ushered in a period of instability known as the 20 Years' Anarchy, during which the empire saw a rapid succession of emperors and further territorial losses. Yet Justinian's story endured, not as a tale of triumph but as a cautionary narrative about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fragility of power built on fear. Cultural and symbolic legacy. The image of Justinian II with his golden nose captured the imagination of both contemporaries and later generations. In Byzantine art and coinage, the golden prosthetic was not hidden but celebrated, a testament to his refusal to be defined by his mutilation. This imagery resonated beyond Byzantium, influencing medieval European perceptions of resilience and divine favor. The golden nose became a metaphor for transformation, a ruler who turned a mark of shame into a badge of authority. Justinian's story also reflects broader themes in Byzantine history: the tension between imperial absolutism and the need for consensus, the interplay of religion and politics, and the constant struggle to maintain unity in a sprawling empire. His life is a microcosm of Byzantium's strengths and weaknesses, its ability to endure through adaptability, but also its vulnerability to internal division and external pressure. In modern scholarship, Justinian II is often seen as a tragic figure, a man whose potential was undermined by his own flaws. Historians like John Julius Norwich and Judith Heron note that his reign, while turbulent, was a critical moment in the empire's evolution, forcing it to confront the limits of autocratic rule. His return from exile remains one of the most remarkable comebacks in medieval history, a testament to the enduring allure of the Byzantine throne.